Hi, Adam. Welcome to the Leanpub launch video for Advanced ChatGPT for Agile Project Management. I was wondering if you could take a couple of minutes. Yeah, hey, I was just wondering if you could take a couple of minutes to talk a little bit about yourself and about the book and who it's for.
Yeah, sure. So I'm a long-term project manager. I started in the 80s and kind of pretty much been working through that, both in traditional project management, agile project management, and everything in between. I started writing a couple of other books, which are kind of almost done, around my own personal experience with projects, a kind of set of axioms, if you like, of what I hold to be true. But I've been using ChatGPT for pretty much 12 months now, and like really excited about what it could do, and seeing a lot of confusion around people trying to use it for things it was never intended to do and not really understanding it. So I thought, well, I'll just try and put the two things together. Just my knowledge of Agile Project Management, which seems to be more attuned, have a bit better affinity, I think, for ChatGPT or that sort of application of non-structured engagement of a tool like that. And given that I've just become very familiar with the way that the Leanpub platform works, which again is very fantastic for integrating text that's been generated by different sources. Kind of just came to me one day to try and put the two things together to look at how ChatGPT could generate Markdown that I could then edit as I've been editing my own content. I can use search engines, I can use different other sources of text, and then put the whole thing together to focus on Agile Project Management. I'm a kind of, I guess the way my approach to things generally is, if something's like vague and people are kind of not on the same page, I like to kind of build structure to help people navigate through a conversation where people differently talking to cross purposes, or perhaps there's a lack of understanding. So a lot of this is really trying to lay down, I call them reference models, which is probably a pretty grandiose term for just a structure that we orient around. People can disagree with it or not, but the idea is to create frameworks for how do you use ChatGPT, what do some of the terms mean, how do you deconfuse what people do, and understand where everybody's at. How do you work out what's a good affinity for, what problems have a good affinity for ChatGPT type of solutions, and then look at how you actually go through a project and go, well, I'm at this phase, I'm doing these things, and then try and say, well, how would I use ChatGPT for, say, the envisaging phase if I'm doing a brainstorming session? So to try and break it down very methodically, and then look at the intersection of the different references and go, okay, well, this is what you should do. This will work. This won't work. Here's how we go about it. So that's the genesis of it.
Yeah, it's really great. I was going through it, preparing for this video, and when I noticed the structure, I had the very careful attention to structure. That's like very kind of effective. One of the interesting things is that you set it up in the context of your experience, but then you go into a deep dive, like into what ChatGPT really is, how the technology works, so that people who are maybe new to this will get the right foundation, so they can understand later when you get to the practical real world examples about Agile Project Management, they actually know what they're looking at. And that's actually like a really important thing. I mean, you understand this stuff way better than I do, but it's a really important thing for working with AI is to first know what it's really doing. Don't anthropomorphize it,
Yep.
Don't, if it makes mistakes, don't get mad at it, like just try to understand it better and try to,
Yep.
do it better. And so instead of just, you could have just dived in with some examples, but instead people can flick to those if they want, but you give them this sort of structured introduction at the beginning, which is really great. Well, Adam, as I always like to say to authors before I hit the record button, I try to go against my own nature and keep these conversations short for social media. So thank you very much for taking the time out of your day to do this launch video.
Thanks, Len. It's been great. Really appreciate you taking the time to do it with me. Thank you.